Hello, my name is Brian Ott. I am the District Local Assistance Engineer for Caltrans District 11. This will be a brief presentation on how to program your local assistance project. In today's presentation, we'll take a high-level look at what is local assistance, project funding and selection, programming, looking at general programming guidelines, common programming errors, programming techniques, and we'll wrap things up with best practices. When people think of Caltrans, they typically think of one thing, freeways. But Caltrans does a lot more than just freeways. Caltrans is focused on providing a world-class transportation network that is safe and reliable, serving all the people of all communities and doing so in a manner that respects the environment. One way Caltrans accomplishes this goal is through their local assistance branch. Caltrans Local Assistance functions as a steward of financial investments. We help the local public agencies, such as the cities, counties, tribes, successfully deliver projects that receive state and federal funding to enrich our communities. Why does Caltrans have a local assistance division? Local assistance is here to get the funds through the regulatory process and into the bank account of the local public agencies. Funding is either from the feds, FHWA, or the state, hence the funding source will dictate the degree of complications and the amount of paperwork. For local assistance, our partners are many. Our regulatory partners include FHWA and the California Transportation Commission at a high level to secure funding. We interact with the regional transportation planning agencies, metropolitan planning organizations who program these funds. These include ICTC and SCAG in the Imperial Valley and SANDAG here in San Diego. Our customer base are the local public agencies, such as the various cities and counties in both San Diego and the Imperial Valley regions, but also the local tribes, joint powers authorities, the Port of San Diego, transit systems, some school districts, and even both SANDAG and Caltrans. For local assistance, our job is a bit of a balancing act, ensuring the funds are administered in a timely fashion and the laws and regulations are followed, all while advocating on behalf of the local agencies to our regulatory partners and assisting the local agencies to navigate the laws and regulations to ensure their projects are successful. Local assistance has three primary areas of focus: project delivery, guidance, and oversight. Essentially, this means local assistance processes the local agency funding requests, both state and federal, helps the locals through the FHWA and CTC maze of regulations and forms, helps the locals understand the various guidelines for fundings, provides timely announcements on existing and new programs, provides training, and ensures compliance with federal and state requirements through oversight. Let's now do a brief high-level overview of how a local agency applies for funding in one of the various state or federal programs. So how do you get your project funded? Well, first, is it adopted into the long-range regional transportation plan? Second, is it on or off the federal aid system? For questions on who to contact for funding, do not directly contact FHWA if you have a funding question. Begin with contacting the program grantor if you are unsure if your project has federal or state funds. So for example, the programs noted in blue, you would contact Caltrans. For discretionary funds, you would contact your congressman. This is a simplified process for project selection by the state. Selection by the state means state of California. So this is the process for federal aid programs, such as HBP, safety, ATP, and discretionary. So Caltrans will issue a survey or a call for projects. The local assistance helps agencies get familiar with the applications and the program requirements. The local agency will submit the application for funding to Caltrans. Caltrans will then review, verify, and evaluate the applications and rank them. Caltrans provides approved project lists to the MPO for programming into the RTIP. Selection of projects by the MPO or RTPA is a process for state-funded projects. For these projects, the local agency will already have identified the need for the project. In this process, the MPO will issue a call for projects. The local agency submits its applications for funding to the MPO for inclusion into the regional transportation plan. The MPO programs the projects into the RTIP. Once the local agency has secured funding via one of the federal or state programs, the next step is to program the funds. This simplified flowchart illustrates where in the project phase transportation programming occurs. Caltrans Local Assistance begins working with the local agencies at the transportation programming phase and will assist in the subsequent phases. Let's now take a look at a few of the most common local assistance programs, the first being the Highway Bridge Program. Note that the Bridge Program does not have a call for projects. A project can be added potentially at every time. The best time to program your project is at the October status report and also during the March update. Note that local agencies are responsible for programming capacity increasing projects, while Caltrans District 11 will program the non-capacity increasing projects. These are in Cal 44. The local agency is responsible for programming matching funds if they are using Transnet. Let's now look at the Highway Safety Improvement Program, or HSIP. These funds should be programmed when funding needs are identified with a call for projects. Caltrans will identify the funding per the federal fiscal year. Caltrans will program all the project funds. Note that these are listed in the group listing Cal 105. Individual projects can be found in the group listing on the SANDAG RTIP website. Note that for HSIP cycles 10 and 11, there is an exchange for federal funds for state funds. Thus, the projects in cycles 10 and 11 were required to follow state regulations, not the federal regulations. It is anticipated that the same will occur with future cycles. Let's now look at Active Transportation Program, or ATP. The funding need is identified when there is a call for projects. The CTC will approve and program the funding per the state fiscal year. Please note that ATP Cycle 7 call for projects is anticipated to be announced in late March 2024. Federally funded programs generally require the local agency to provide a non-federal matching funds to pay for projects per 23 U.S.C. 120. Depending on the program, that will determine how much of the match the local agency will need to provide. Most require an 11.47% federal match. Let's briefly look at an RTIP example of an individual project listing. The RTIP focuses on 5 areas: project description, fund type, fund year, fund phase, and the fund amount programmed per fund type, per fund year, and per fund phase. All of your hard work up to this point can be rendered useless and your project delayed if your project is programmed incorrectly in the RTIP. This is a list of the most common errors we see. Project is not programmed in the RTIP. Incorrect RTIP information, such as not enough money programmed, the wrong fund type, wrong phases programmed, wrong fiscal year, outside of the 4-year RTIP funding window, no EPSP is approved, not programmed for advanced construction, and the project description is wrong. The RTIP is not set completely in stone. Not all is lost if you made any of the errors we just discussed. Through the use of certain programming techniques, it is possible to move funds around, albeit with limitations. This is done using advanced construction, post-programming, and expedited project selection procedures, otherwise known as EPSP. Advanced construction is a project authorization technique that allows FHWA to authorize a project without obligating federal funds. Essentially, FHWA approves a project as being eligible for federal funding, but does not commit to funding the project. This is done when federal funds are not available for obligation. The local agency must provide local funds to be programmed with the conversion to federal funds at a later date. This means the local agency must have sufficient local funds to pay for all the project costs until such time as federal funds become available for reimbursement, otherwise known as AC conversion. This allows you as a local agency to begin your project early, but you must consider the risk that the federal funds may never become available. Note that the work must follow federal requirements to be eligible for reimbursement. Post-programming is used when the project costs of a current phase of work exceed the expected, that is, program or obligated amount, and additional funds must be authorized to complete the project. It allows funds programmed in a future federal fiscal year for that phase of work to be brought into the current federal fiscal year, or new funds to be programmed on the current phase of work in the current federal fiscal year. Note that post-programming requires the local agency to obtain a letter from SANDAG requesting the additional funds as post-programming. without the letter from SANDAG authorizing post-programming, we would need to wait for an RTIP amendment before the E76 can be processed and authorized. To expedite authorization of funds, SANDAG is just providing a letter in lieu of the updated programming document, which will be done at a later date. Note that post-programming requests are not guaranteed as fiscal constraints must be maintained. Let's look at expedited project selection procedures, also known as EPSP. This allows a local agency to begin a project or phase, such as right-of-way or construction, listed in the current RTIP credit quadrennial, with funding programmed outside of the current federal fiscal year. So for example, the CON phase is not open and no money is programmed for the CON phase in the current federal fiscal year. With EPSP, you can open the CON phase and advance money to the current federal fiscal year from a future or prior federal fiscal year. Note that financial constraint still applies. As a local agency, you must request EPSP, and the funding administrator grants approval. Example of a funding administrator such as HBP and HSIP would be Caltrans. Let's now take a look at a few best practices. I would like to bring the 4 best practices to your attention. First, familiarize yourself with Caltrans local assistance websites and where to find information, such as manuals, program guidelines, forms, etc. 2. Coordinate with your area engineer early and often. Each local agency is assigned an area engineer. They are here to help you, so please reach out to them whenever you have questions. Third, ensure your project scope, cost, and schedule all line up with the programming in the RTIP. And fourth, early delivery in the fiscal year is highly encouraged. I hope this presentation was useful. If you have any questions, please contact myself or your area engineer. Please make note of the local assistance website URL and bookmark it, as information on programs is regularly being updated. If you have not yet done so, please sign up for the Caltrans Local Assistance blog to receive emails and updates on important local assistance related topics. Thank you for your time.